This is episode 16 with Wesley Chapman. Hi, my name is Mike Dillard, and this is Self-Made Man, the podcast for men who want to leave their mark on the world and create a legacy of honor, integrity, and achievement in every aspect of their lives. I'm glad you're here, and once again, it is time to forge your destiny. It's safe to say that all of us have struggles in life. My years in middle school and high school were absolutely brutal. I was beaten up, pissed on, excluded from absolutely everything. Had my trust gained and betrayed over and over again for sport. Had my house papered over 100 times and walked into the cafeteria as the entire school stopped eating in order to chant my nickname for the day over and over again. And during that time, I realized that I had a choice. I could choose to become the victim they wanted me to be, or I could choose to take whatever was being given and grow stronger from it. But what I went through was nothing compared to Wesley Chapman. For example, at the age of 12, Wesley and his siblings were strung upside down from a laundry line as a knife was held against their throats and their lives threatened should they ever speak a word about the sexual abuse that they were put through daily and had been put through for years. What he endured during his childhood was truly a nightmare, and by all accounts, he should either be dead, a drug addict, or in prison. But he is not. And in fact, he is changing the world in one of the most amazing stories that you will ever hear. So please stop what you're doing right now and take the opportunity to listen to one of the most inspiring people that you will ever meet. What you've been through in your past and what you're going through right now can either pull you down or it can push you higher to greatness, and the choice is yours. Please welcome Wesley Chapman. Welcome back to Self-Made Man, ladies and gentlemen. Mike Dillard here, and today I have an absolutely amazing human being to share with you who has one of the most unbelievable stories that I have personally ever heard. And his name is Wes Chapman, and Wes is, well, right now he is the head of an incredible organization called The Human Project that he's going to tell you a little bit about today. But I wanted to talk to Wes because he, more than anyone else that I can honestly say I've ever met, has come from a childhood and a set of circumstances that are so unbelievable, it really is going to leave your mouth hanging open. And he has used that pain and that struggle to build something that is absolutely amazing, that is impacting millions of people around the world. And so I'm honored to have you here, Wes, on the show today to share your story and to inspire our audience here today, which I know you're going to do in a very big way.
Mike, thank you. I'm humbled as I look over your life journey and what you've accomplished in your life. I'm very humbled, and I appreciate that. And I just want to say, usually the host does all that fun stuff and does the fun intro. And as I was going through your bio, give you a moment of some praise here, is that I was reading all the fancy stuff you've done in the business world, and I thought that was amazing. But what I really loved learning about was your passion for children. And that was something that I think is going to make this conversation very powerful, is that not only are you a father and doing amazing things with your children, but the quote there from Make-A-Wish, I think that is so powerful about what you did for your local community. And I just want to give you some credit for that, because I don't think that enough people realize how important it is to work with our youth. And we talk about it because it sells very well, I guess is a nice way of saying that. But to see somebody actually doing it is fantastic. So I'm honored to be on your program, to connect with you and to have a conversation about whatever we have about. So thank you so much for having me on.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Wes. I appreciate it. So what I would love it if you could do is spend 5, 10, 15 minutes, however you need, to share your story with our listeners today, because it's almost unbelievable what you went through and then what you've turned it into. And we'd love to talk about the Human Project and the means behind that. But I'd love to spend the second half of the show here today discussing the ins and outs of building a nonprofit and how do you have the kind of impact that you want to have to meet your goals in a very difficult industry. And I'd love to hear about the business side as well. But before we get into that, please tell everyone that's listening today about your journey and how it brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And to give your audience kind of a glimpse of just the longevity, I guess, I don't know what the best word is, of my story. I'm currently working with a publisher right now, and I wrote kind of the manuscript for the book. And the publisher has come back and told me that this is going to have to be a 3-part book because there's just, people aren't going to sit down and read a 700-page book. And the first book is going to be from the age of 0 to 13. So just to kind of put it in perspective, there was a lot that happened. So I'm just going to give some of the highlighted Cliff Note version of the story, and then we can pick what part we want to dive into or move on. But the basics is that before I was even born, there were things going on in my life that were affecting, my life, from who my father was to what he was doing, to my mother, to the decisions they made together. I have a handicapped brother who was exactly 11 months younger than me, and he is mentally handicapped, which is what I should have been based on some of the abuse that was happening, the drug use, things like that. And so it's a miracle that I don't have that. But when I was born, a year after that, my father left. When I was 6.5 years old, my mother abandoned me at a hospital. I tried to commit suicide 12 times before my 16th birthday. And the reason for that was I was abused in every possible way you could think of. A lot of my abuse was endured between the ages of 1 and 8. And then I had other forms of abuse that I endured until I was about 17, 18 years old. And a lot of that came at the hands of stepfathers or temporary homes, things like that. And the abuse ranged from everything from, I call it stereotypical, but stereotypical verbal abuse and physical abuse to very serious sexual abuse, sexual torture, physical torture, and also even religious abuse, which I endured. And there was quite a bit in there. And to give a perspective of what I'm talking about, because a lot of people don't hear about sexual torture, that was the part of my life where I was used as a puppet or an amusement doll. I don't know what you would call it, but my stepfather wouldn't just sexually molest us. He would use us as part of, the party. They would get drunk, and 6 or 7 guys would be drinking beers around, your stereotypical, kind of think of your stereotypical suburban driveway with a couple of bikes in it, a couple of Harleys, and then guys drinking beer, and then they would get to an intoxication point and then bring us out and see what we would do as small children sexually. So it was very, very difficult. I was tied up to fences. I was tied up to dog houses, forced to eat dog food, forced to eat food out of a dog dish. I mean, all kinds of different stories. And I don't want to put everyone in this horrible mood, but it was just the reality of my life. And then there was...
I think people need to hear the details.
Yeah, and so there was just a lot of different things. I was threatened to never tell anyone by being hung upside down on a clothesline and a knife put to my throat. There were other types of threats. My younger siblings would die if I ever said anything. I was the oldest, and at the age of 4.5 was my first documented suicide attempt, which sounds insane because what 4-year-old even knows the concept of life, let alone the concept of death. However, I was a very mature 4.5-year-old, and my suicide attempt was very real, and it was, again, like I said, a documented deal. And what I did was ran out into the street screaming, I want to die in front of a car. And luckily enough, the person that was driving the car was able to stop. And they found out at that point that, my mom wasn't home and there was a bunch of other things going on. And so they started testing me. They started figuring out what was wrong with me, what was happening. Yeah, they found out, my mom would leave for a few hours. I don't really know if it was hours, days. To a kid, it felt like forever. And I was in charge of my 3 younger siblings. Again, I'm 4.5. You can put the math together. I had 3 younger siblings. They weren't very old.
My son is 4.5 right now, and he, knows how to play with his toys, and that's about all. So that's unbelievable.
Yeah, I have a memory, actually, very, very distinct memory. And my memories of my childhood are very clear in certain aspects and then very unclear in other aspects. And one of the clear memories I have is actually making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for my little brother. And when my mother came home and my stepfather came home, he beat me because I had made a mess in the kitchen. And it was a legitimate mess. I mean, imagine a 4.5-year-old making a sandwich. It was a legitimate mess. And as a parent, I would have been upset too if I was in the other room and, I told my child, not to climb on the counters and do everything. Not if I was, in another zip code. Anyway, so at 4.5, they started testing me. They started going through a bunch of evaluation. They started trying to figure out Why did I throw all these fits? What was I doing? At this point in my life, I was not telling anyone anything. I was folding my arms and acting, like I was this tough guy. Don't mess with me. And after 3.5 years of testing my brain and putting every possible, thing that they had in the 80s at me, I was diagnosed with about 6 or 7 different mental conditions, one being post-traumatic stress, bipolar, ADD, just a bunch of different labels that are ridiculous. And I was also given a diagnosis that I would never become anything. This is at 7.5 years old. I have the paperwork, which took me years to find because this was back in the day of microfiche, not hard drives. And so basically I was told that I would be nothing. I would amount to nothing in life. I wouldn't be an asset to society. I would be lucky to drive a car. I would be, I would never have a relationship that yielded any kind of fruit. I would never be, a stable income provider, none of those things. And so at 7.5 years old, I was given that. And I remember very clearly being filled with rage and anger because I knew what was going on. And I knew the truth of my life. And I remember being told these things, obviously a little more sensitively, but also as a kid, you hear things that adults think you don't hear. So I overheard a lot of the conversations that were happening. And I remember just being filled with rage and kind of saying, how dare I not have an opportunity to live my life when my life has never been mine to live in the first place? You're giving me a prediction, a diagnosis based on the fact that of my character when actually I've never been allowed to develop my character. And it was in that moment that I made both a positive and negative decision. And the positive decision was I was going to prove every single person wrong. I was going to show them that they had no idea who I was. They had no right to tell me that that was my life. And I was going to prove them wrong. And I say that's positive because obviously we initially think that that's an amazing concept to have in life. But I learned, fast forwarding until when I was 25, that I would have not had a lot of the heartache and a lot of the pain and would have had a lot stronger relationships with people around me if I would have just rephrased that and taken that energy just a little differently and said, I'm going to prove myself right. Because in saying I'm going to prove everybody wrong, I was actually subconsciously admitting that there was something that they were saying that was right, which was not. All I needed to do was prove myself right and stay in that. And that's kind of a deep lesson that I learned. But I want people who have ever gone through something or are listening to this and saying, yeah, that's right, prove everybody wrong, is that is subconsciously admitting that something they were saying was right, which nothing they were saying was accurate.
And how old were you when you made this decision?
This was when I was 7.5 is when I started this process of anger and rage and letting that start fueling me. And it took about another year, about 8-9 months. And then after that diagnosis, and then I was finally placed into a home that I was never taken out of permanently. I have tons of stories of being taken out for weeks at a time or losing a court battle or something happening. But my grandmother was able to finally find me in the hospital, and she was able to get a weekend temporary custody, which then became a week, then came 2 weeks, then became a year, and then finally, I lived with her forever. But that was a whole journey in itself, and we had to hide from police, and there's just tons of different stories that happened there because of some of the flaws in our system. But she took me in. And she was very wealthy. She was a woman in the 80s that was an executive at a government hospital. So she was a very powerful person. She was single. She was not with anyone at the time that she took me, which was also kind of a very difficult battle to have, as a powerful woman in the 80s was going to take care of this troubled child, and she had no father figure. That was a lot of court battling to convince courts that was a suitable home for me. But about 6-7 months into her and I's journey, and literally I lived in a mansion with her, an old 100-year-old mansion that had velvet wallpaper. It was my first time being around any kind of money. And in that experience, I became very excited to have breakfast, to live a normal life, to go to school, to have friends, to just experience the normality of a childhood with all of the baggage that I was dealing with. I was on antidepressants. I was on, all kinds of different drugs. In fact, I got up to 25 different drugs every single day to kind of figure out what was going on. And about 8 months into this whole experiment, she became disabled. She developed fibromyalgia and basically lost the use of her arms and her legs. And she went from being this powerful, iconic female to basically just sitting on her bed, crying and sobbing with her arms in a sling and, having to have help to walk to the bathroom. And so I became very, again, kind of perplexed in the concept of life and the concept of reality to why are we here? And this isn't, I'm 8.5 years old now, and you just have to put in perspective that my mental capacity, my physical capacity, everything about my life is not your normal life. And you study history and we see that even in this country, 11-year-old boys would be given a horse and 200 cattle and told to take them across the country. So it's not unheard of in history for young, quote unquote, children to do amazing things. It's just all dependent on how and where we're raised. And we've kind of gotten this illusion that children don't have power until they hit some certain type of age. And that's not the case. And so I'm sitting here and I'm just perplexed on life and why are we here? Obviously, adults don't get it. I had a lot of different things that make it funny and make the story unique. But I remember sitting on a tire swing and just thinking, like, the reality of life is you can't trust anyone. You can't rely on anyone. You can't do anything unless it's coming from yourself. And it was in that moment that I looked around this gorgeous estate that we lived on, and I call her mom. So I'll make it very clear if I talk about my bio mom, I say bio mom. But my mom was a green thumb, still is to this day. She has an 1.5 acres in Idaho that gets in magazines and is award winning and all this fun stuff. But at this time in her life, she had this amazing rose garden, like English style rose garden. We had peonies, tulips, lilacs. I mean, every single flower that could grow in a zone 4 we had. For those of you that know anything about landscaping, that's a colder zone climate, so you don't get everything, but you still get some cool things. I remember looking at it, and I remember then going to the grocery store, and I'm a big breakfast guy, still am to this day, and bacon is like my vice. My fiance is a huge healthy, eater and all that stuff, but I still am like, give me a plate of bacon, I'm the happiest guy on earth. And I just remember going to the store and thinking how ridiculous it was that we would buy, 1 pound of bacon and then a dozen flowers. And it's like, or, 2 or 3 bouquets of flowers. I'm like, do you realize, Grandma, Mom, that we have like a whole freaking yard of flowers? We don't have a whole yard of bacon? Let's buy more bacon and let's lay off on the flowers. And I remember thinking this through in my head and then thinking the key to life, the key to creating an amazing life that nobody can take away from you is having the resources, needed. And the resource that was needed was money. And my grandmother was losing everything. I mean, she'd gone from, I'm pretty sure she had a 6-figure income to, now she's in a legal battle, and she was one of the first people. She was the first female diagnosed with fibromyalgia in the United States government. And so, it was just like, she was fighting this huge battle, and everyone's saying she was faking it, and fibromyalgia had its own stigma, and there was all kinds of stuff going on there. So we were literally losing everything. And she was talking about that, and I could overhear these conversations. And I just said, you know what? I'm going to get my BMX. I'm going to get a pair of scissors, and I'm going to cut all these flowers, because if we'll buy flowers at a freaking grocery store when we have all these flowers, then people in my neighborhood who don't have these flowers and who drive by slowly in front of our house every single day, they're going to buy these flowers. And I ran in the house, I grabbed a pair of scissors, and I started cutting these flowers. And I just remember my mother coming out and just screaming at me, because this was like her last thing that she was losing everything, and this was it. And I'm whacking them away. And I, just kept whacking them away. And I got on my bike and I took off for the day. And this was in the morning, and I spent all day selling flowers door to door. And I came home that night, and she was sitting on her bed, and I'll never forget this. And she and I have talked about this now post since, writing these stories and doing these interviews. And she's given me some of her perspective. And I'll never remember sitting next to her, or never forget, excuse me. And I had money stuffed in every crevice that a child could stuff money into, my shirt pocket, my pants pockets, my socks, everything. And I just remember pulling out all this money and handing it to her. And she just started sobbing. And from her perspective, she was terrified that I had done something horrible. I was notorious for that. I almost burnt down a 7-Eleven. I stole thousands of dollars. I did a lot of crazy things out of pain in my childhood and anger. And so we counted the money, and she started crying the more and more we counted the money. And finally, she asked me, where did all this come from? And I said, well, remember those flowers you were yelling at me about cutting? I sold them door to door. And we counted the money, and it was over $500. And it was in that moment she looked at me and said, go cut more flowers. And it was in that moment I realized that I had power. I could create power. And I never looked back. I've had a lot of successes and I've had a lot of failures. I also learned another lesson, that if I could create money and I could create this story of this boy, this child who could create money, nobody wanted to talk about anything else besides how amazing it was that an 8-year-old, a 9-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old could do this. And I had employees, and I learned all kinds of stuff, and I've taught tons of lessons about just going and knocking doors with flowers. We figured out price point, we figured out what was easiest. Everybody had a 20 in their wallet, and very few people had a 10. So it was easier to sell the flowers for 20 because you didn't have to worry about change, and it was a simplistic thing. It was difficult for me to sell flowers to a stay-at-home dad or a dad who'd come home from work. But if I I recruited a little 10-year-old girl, little blonde girl, to go sell the flowers, he would buy them all day long because it was a different energy. It was a different statement. I learned that all I needed to do, to sell flowers to a housewife was a one-liner that just was basically like, this will make your home beautiful, or this will make you feel loved, or your husband said that you should get these. I learned all kinds of different tricks and techniques that carried throughout my career. And so anyway, and then I hid in entrepreneurialism, I guess is what you could say. And I hid in the concept that I didn't have to talk about me and my past and who I was and who my dad is and where my dad was and what my story was. All anyone cared about was, holy crap, this guy can make money, and look how young and cute he is. And that even carried in. I left the flower business fairly quickly, did that for 2 years, and then I got into the tech business, and I started helping doctors because computers were just becoming a thing. 486s, 386s, Pentium 1s, Pentium 2s. Anyone under the age of 30 doesn't know what I'm talking about, but this was like a new age, and these doctors were using computers and they had no idea what to do with them. I remember walking in and they were using most of them as paperweights. And I developed a scheduling software program and started consulting doctors and got into the tech space. And then I got into more of the consulting, branding, marketing. I just kept going. So anyway, that's a quick synopsis.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. So, the big piece here that I love to stress is that you were able to take circumstances that were unbelievable, literally inspired you to try to kill yourself, and were able to have make a conscious decision to take that pain and turn it into something positive, which is what you've continued to do here. And I think as of right now, at this point in your career, that's really culminated in a human project, which has been inspired by all of the trials and tribulations that you've gone through. And if you could now tell people a little bit about what the Human Project is all about.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. So, just very clear, as I stated, 12 times I tried to commit suicide, documented, before my 16th birthday. Now, documented means I got caught. There were many, many, many other times that I didn't get caught, or that I was having my own moment where I had to convince myself not to die. It's a really weird thing. But because of that and that journey and that experience, I woke up at about 27, 28 years old. I woke up and started realizing that, yes, it's true. Money is an amazing utility. Yes, it's true. Money can create power. Yes, it's true. Money can give you control. But what money can never give you is relationships. And I'll battle anyone until they're blue until I'm blue in the face. And I promise I'll win if that's our stopping point. That money cannot buy you relationships. It can buy you the illusion of a relationship, but it cannot build real relationships for you. And I had the money, I had success, I was doing life, but I had zero relationships. I stepped on whatever I needed to get to the top because that's the only place that I didn't have to stay in my life. And so at about 27, I started waking up. 26, 27, I started waking up, and I started going on a journey. It took me about 5 years, but I started going on a journey to figure out how I could become, more than just this cool entrepreneur that did really cool things, and people would kind of sort of get the glimpse of my life or hear that I was didn't have a dad or something, and they would think that was amazing, but that was as deep as it went. And the first piece of that was me reaching out to my biological father. I had just had my first child, so I was 25 because I just had my first child, and at 26 that's when I started really saying, okay, what the heck? And I reached out to my biological father. I met him in a hotel elevator at a very schwank, private little hotel in LA, right outside of Beverly Hills. And it was nothing like anybody could ever imagine. It wasn't this Hollywood story. It was quite, quite stupid, actually. It happened in an elevator, like I said, and it was just like a 2-second moment of, yep, he's my son. And then we moved on, and I've maybe had 72 hours of contact with him since. And so that wasn't it. So then I started talking to people like Bob Proctor and Zig Ziglar and Brian Tracy and Tony Robbins and Les Brown, and started getting into that world of motivational speakers, and was told that you need to be a motivational speaker. You've got all this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds awesome. Being able to see people change their lives, and I'll do whatever I got to do that. That sounds great. And that wasn't it. That wasn't for me. It wasn't the lifestyle I wanted. I respect those guys immensely for what they give up, not for what they get. And so I kind of just was scratching my head, just thinking, this is ridiculous. Maybe I made a huge mistake, and I need to go back to this, lifestyle that I had. And so I started going back, and I started putting my hat back in the ring and telling people I'm coming back, and I'll consult you, and I'll do these things. And I started signing contracts and started doing things, and weird stuff would happen. Weird stuff. I'd sign a 6-figure contract, and the client would have a heart attack the next morning, and they would not die or anything, but they'd call me and say, we're not going to be able to move forward on this project because so-and-so's got, an 8 months recovery period from this, or a stroke. One of my cars started on fire when I was on the way to a huge meeting. I mean, and it wasn't like a 1987 car. It was a Mercedes that we had just purchased. I mean, just all kinds of crazy things were happening and made no sense. And during the weekends, I had found this incredible passion to start sharing my story with youth. And I was being asked to speak at different facilities and different places and doing different things. And so one weekend led to another weekend, which led to a bigger weekend and more youth. And then finally I was asked to speak at a public school. And I tell this full story over on the Entrepreneur podcast with John Lee Dumas, Entrepreneur on Fire, so you can go hear the whole story. But the synopsis of it is that I'd never spoken at a public school. I was terrified, not of speaking, but that, it's a public school. I'm used to speaking at prisons and boys' homes and foster facilities where I can say whatever the heck I want to say and use whatever language I need to use. And I'm a very blunt guy. I've been very, kind of calm because it's early this morning, but I'm a very blunt guy, and I don't cut corners when I'm talking about these topics. And I'm not shy to give details. And I'm also not shy to put people where they need to be put as far as in a mental position. And so that requires some bluntness. And it even rubs, foster facilities and prisons the wrong way, but it gets results. And so I'm sitting here thinking, I can't do that in a public school because, what if little Sally's in there and Sally's mom gets all mad because I said molestation or I used, the wrong verbiage. And so I was just petrified. And then I'd been asked to speak by one of the largest nonprofits in the United States, and they work with youth. And I was just like, I really want to show these guys that I've got it, because, man, these guys reach, I think it's 800,000 or something ridiculous youth every single year. I'm like, man, if I could do that, this would really be a cool part of my life. And so I had all these fears, and I got up on the stage and I started doing this really weird keynote that I've never given again in my life. And I tried playing super soft and cute, and I started getting heckled by this audience of about 700 plus youth, which is nuts. In a space that was only supposed to hold 200 youth. And there's a whole story behind that. And like I said, you can hear that on the Entrepreneur on Fire podcast. But I'm just standing up there, and these kids are heckling me, and they're swearing at me. They're calling me a cracker. I mean, it's just like, you got to be kidding me. And at that moment, I'm a man of God. I believe in God, and I said a little prayer, and I just said, and I'll never forget. I just said, and I have kind of a fun relationship with God. I just said, dude, I don't know if you think this is funny. I don't know what's going on here, but we have two options. You either cut the power or help me out, because this is not working. And it was in that moment when I had this overwhelming feeling that it's not about you, it's about them. And at that moment, I dropped every fear. I dropped everything that was speaking right to what I needed to hear. And I gave I don't even call it a keynote, but I gave my reel. And in that reel, you could hear a pin drop for 18 minutes. And the kids were connected. And we had an amazing experience where my 18-minute keynote ended up being 4 or 5 hours of me sitting knees to knees with these kids, talking to them for 4 or 5 hours, hundreds of children, about their stories of abuse, their stories of neglect, their stories of abandonment. And I could tell every single one of them. I have not ever forgotten one story. One particular story reached me very deeply, and it was a girl named Alexandra. And she told me about how she had just gotten off of 72-hour watch, which means she had just tried to commit suicide, and she was hospitalized for 72 hours to make sure she wouldn't do it again. She told me about not being able to see color, that she was incredibly depressed. She was a cutter. She hated her life. She hated everything about her existence. Her father had left. Her stepfather was not doing everything politely and nicely, and there was a lot going on in her life. And I gave her some lessons and talked to her about just living life and what she needed to do. And I made promises. And I made promises to all these kids. I told them if they would do this, I would do this. And, some of them were, I would get them a recording deal where they could record their song and have it professionally recorded. Others, I told them I would, get them a guitar. And my fiance's sitting there going, what the hell are you doing, Wes? Like, you're promising these kids things that are just like, A, ridiculous, and B, are going to take so much time. And we've been on this 4-year journey of figuring out life. Like, we're not in a financial position to do all of this. You need to kind of calm down. And I told her, I said, look, half these kids aren't even going to do what I say. So, it's just giving them hope. It's okay. And my fiance comes from a very different background, white picket fence, lived up in the mountains, rich community, father loved her, blah, blah, blah. So she kind of just trusted me. She said, okay, all right, cool. And Alexandra had never been to the beach. And I told her that if she did all these amazing things, which were literally like go on a walk, talk to your mom, simple things, that I would take her to the beach. And we ended up leaving, got stuck in traffic. And in that traffic, my phone blew up. I'd given these kids my email address and a couple of them my phone number. And my phone started blowing up. I started getting 6, 7-page emails written, and these were 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And they started writing me emails that were better than emails I'd gotten from CEOs at, from Fortune 500 companies. And in the concept of like telling a story. And they were telling me stuff, and they were telling me about how they'd never had so much hope, and they were so excited to live life, and that, they'd already started on projects that I had told them. And one girl had already finished one of the projects, and I'm like sitting there going, oh crap, looks like my fiance was right yet again. And I'll call her Jody because that's more personal, but Jody's right yet again. And holy crap, what am I going to do? And so in that moment, we started talking about what could we do and who do we know? And, we know this guy who knows Jason Mraz, who, we know this, and we could do this. And I could make this phone call to this entrepreneur who, knows this person. And it just started going through this whole thing. And on the drive home, just the energy, the excitement, I'll never forget it in the car. And we got home, it's about 9:00 at night, and Jody, about 8:00, 8:30, Jody goes into the kitchen. She starts cooking. We hadn't eaten. I'd been at the school. Now at this point, we'd left, I believe, at like 10 in the morning and maybe 9 in the morning. So we've basically been at the school all day. I had to cancel my entire day, which was fine. And I then got text messages from Alexandra. And Alexandra had sent me in text message, her detailed plan on how that day she was going to kill herself. She had made another plan. The first one had failed. She knew exactly why it failed. This one was not going to fail. And that she was going to kill herself after school that day. And I will never forget at the very end of her text messages, she said, "You saved my life. Thank you." And I remember in that moment thinking how inadequate of a man I was. I didn't do anything that was miraculous or amazing. I didn't have some poetic speech. I just took time with her and gave her some tips and some ideas and some strategy and something to look and live for. And I turned to Jody and I said, if not now, then when? Which for us meant, if I'm not going to do this, if I'm not going to focus on this now, then when am I ever going to? When is it ever going to be convenient to do it? And it was in that moment, which was April 8th, I said, I'm doing it. And I stayed up all night and called every single person I knew. I called the founder of Make-A-Wish Foundation, was my very first call, Frank. Talked to him about my vision, what I saw, what I wanted to build. And he spent about 6 hours collectively over the next 3 days on the phone with me, brainstorming, coming up with ideas. At the very end of our brainstorming, he said, if you pull this off, and this was very intimidating and also very exciting and every other emotion. He said, if you pull this off, this will make Make-A-Wish Foundation look like a drop in the bucket. And I said, I'm going to pull it off no matter what it takes. And we've never looked back. And we've had tremendous trials and we've also had tremendous success. But it all started by one little girl saying, you saved my life. And by me spending, at this point, 33 plus years going through the refiner's fire and everything I've been through, my personal story and all that, yeah, that's great. But everything I've been through, the entrepreneurialism, the stint at being a public speaker and learning how to speak and be on stage and tell stories, and my research of the brain, which is extensive. I spent $1.1 million of my own money trying to understand human development and psychology. And then the government spent $2.1 million on me, testing me and putting me through treatments and psychiatric stuff. So, I should have a bionicle arm, but I just have an immense amount of knowledge on psychology and the brain without any, formal education. I created a program that I have now had a collective of about 20 different psychiatrists and psychologists look over, and each one independently, including a board of psychologists, have told me that what we've created is a 12-year PhD program. And I don't take credit for that. I believe that creativity comes from our environment and it comes from another source, there's a whole great, awesome keynote TED Talk about that and about what the Greeks and Romans thought of creativity. It's absolutely phenomenal. But I believe it was just coming through me because that 12-year PhD program was created in 3 days in my garage on 3 whiteboards. And there's just not humanly possible to create what we created in that space. So I didn't eat, I didn't sleep, I didn't do anything for 72 hours as I built this, what is now a human project. And we've made adjustments and tweaks, but we've not strayed from the original vision, even though we're now in 7 countries and thousands of youth have been impacted. And we are now, I believe, at 300 plus youth this year who have not committed suicide because of our efforts. It's been amazing, but it's also been the most difficult entrepreneurial or business, whatever you want to call it, experience of my life in many, many ways.
So if you could, Wes, tell people what the goal or the mission for a human project is specifically when you guys, take on funds. Where does that money go? How is it used? Is this specifically, to help youth who are suicidal? Is it bigger than that? What's the mission behind it?
Yeah, it's bigger than that because even though that's big, and nobody discredit that, every 13 minutes a child in this country commits suicide, which is a staggering number. It's growing. It's not a decreasing factor. It's actually getting worse. But the factor that we don't understand and we don't talk enough about, is that every minute a child attempts suicide. Why? What's creating that inside of them? Suicide is not a sign of weakness. It's not a sign of mental instability. It's not a sign of being crazy. It's that they want to escape. What are they wanting to escape? And so that was really the thought process there was helping suicidal youth. It's too small for me. And I don't mean that egotistically or arrogantly. It's just if I'm going to do this and if I'm going to do this project, I'm not going to do this as some, meetup club in downtown San Diego. Nothing against that. That's just not me. if I'm going to do something like this, I want to be able to impact, a huge sector of people. I identified it as 25 million youth, because there are 25 million youth in the United States who live in what we determined as a dysfunctional situation. That means that's a wide variety of youth, but that is everything from they don't have a father figure to they're being abused, they're being neglected, they're not eating. There's a huge amount of topics, but what all of those things lead to is youth feeling like they need to escape, youth feeling like they are not in a place of joy and happiness. Everything that we're entitled to, the Constitution says that all men are created equal. It's this concept we're all entitled to certain aspects of life, and one of them should be, even though it's not, happiness. And so when I looked at this, I thought, how can we help there? And when I looked at all the words in the English dictionary, and I'm a big word guy. In fact, one of my most prized possession is an old dictionary that was written almost 100 years ago, and defining words that we use every day, like "how may I serve you," is really the root of the word "serve" is servant. So just think about that. How can I be your servant? That's not what anybody means, but that's the energy it creates. So anyway, I'm a big word guy. And I looked at certain words that we were throwing out in the world and teaching our children, but yet we weren't really teaching them what they were. One of them is empower. We throw out empower like it's candy, and a lot of people use it just in their language, which there's nothing wrong with it. But do we really know what it means? What does it mean to empower somebody? Well, it means to give them every tool and every resource and every piece possible that they themselves become the hero. They themselves become the person that takes care of the problem. That's very difficult for people to do, because that means that you cannot take credit. That means that every time something amazing happens, you have to reinforce the behavior came from them, not you. It's a delicate balance. I could tell an amazing story, maybe I will. We'll have time about how that works. So when we built our mission statement, it is to build a community of empowered youth. So there's two very huge words inside of that. Number one is community. Number two is empowered. Number one is the one that everyone throws out there and they think that, they understand, but we don't. Community is so incredibly important. As I said in the beginning of this, you cannot buy relationships, not true relationships. You cannot have 500 friends on Facebook and say you have 500 friends on Facebook, even though, I've met a few rare people. You and I have a mutual friend in common who literally does have, true relationships with people, but he doesn't make them on Facebook, but they connect on Facebook. But our society has become so diluted in what the word community means because of our human need, not want, our human need to feel appreciated, accepted, and loved, that we have diluted one of the most powerful words and the most powerful concepts is community. And that's, it starts with family. Well, 60%, depending on who you ask, it's higher, it's lower, but, the national average is 60% of children in this country do not understand community. From the age of 0 to 13, they're dealing with some type of divorce. So their community that they understand and know is broken, it's gone. Certain races in our country more of them don't have fathers than do have fathers. I mean, there's so many different things, and the world's an amazing place. Don't get me wrong. The problem is that because of our growth in technology and resources and money, we're forgetting about the core essence. So our mission of a human project is to build a community of empowered youth. And the reason we're in 7 countries is because we're using what these kids are on, technology. We're using my background. I won App of the Year 2 years in a row with Apple, done amazing things with Google. I've had a lot of fun experiences in tech. I love technology. I think it's amazing. But I also feel like we've become dependent on it in the wrong ways. And so, but there's ways we can use technology. So very, very rudimentarily, the concept of a human project is to be an educational portal for youth all around the world on how to empower themselves and how to, A, be a part of a community, which they instantly are once they join our organization, but also create community in their life, which means finding the right people in their circle that can help and make them grow. We in the entrepreneurial space and self-help world like to use Napoleon Hill's surround yourself with 5 people analogy. Well, we just spin that a little bit with the youth and help them find the right people in their lives that are going to lift them up, not drag them down. And we teach them how to, because here's the thing, Mike, is the system isn't broken. The system of the government aid and all this, it's not broken. We can argue about, welfare, all that. But as far as with our youth, the concept's not broken. Child is being abused, take child out, put child in home, get child into a permanent residence after that. That system's not broken. The problem is that there are too many youth who are living this type of a life that no government could ever figure out how to facilitate the number game. I mean, our foster care unit, or our foster care system in the United States is bleeding with children, literally. I believe it's every day we lose a child in the foster care system to suicide or to malnutrition, something. Every day a child dies in our foster care system. And it's not because people don't love those children. It's not because the social workers aren't amazing human beings. It's because the number game just doesn't work. And so the government comes down, the states come down to the fact that if there is a gallon of milk in the fridge and there's a roof over the fridge, then the child has a chance to live, which in all reality they do, because compare it to any other country, that's rich. But the problem is that that's not rich in the society that we've created, not just monetarily, but emotionally, psychologically, the whole nine yards. But the government's hands are tied. So we come in and we help that child create their own reality. And we use everything that, we've talked about: entrepreneurial skills, self-development skills, nutritional skills, workout skills. We're building a program right now on how to teach children how to work out with household items from one of Europe's number one fitness coaches. And because they don't, they can't go to a gym, but they need to work out. They need to do these things so that they have those chemical reactions happening. So, to tell you exactly what we do in 20 minutes is impossible, but realizing that the simplicity of it is that we're an educational portal. And as far as like the donations and how everything works, 41% of your money, so every dollar, 41% goes into managing our programs. We have conferences that we're putting on. Last year alone, I drove in my car 67,000 miles. I don't know how many miles I flew, but I can tell you I flew from California to New York a few times over. So we're on the ground. We're meeting with these children. We're going into schools. We're going into homes. I've lived in homes with children who are suicidal. It's tons of stories. 25% of your donation goes to fulfilling what we call our daydreams, which is going back to the very beginning of that story. I promised these kids that, that we could do things. We are keeping that. So it's kind of like a Make-A-Wish kind of concept where these kids will tell us what they want to do, and then we give them things that they need to do to educate themselves. They earn enough points, and they can cash those points in for what we call daydreams, which are basically volunteer-led group activities where they can go out and do things that they don't get to do. And some of them are so freaking simple. Like they just want to go get ice cream. They've never had ice cream with an adult, like an ice cream shop. They've never put sprinkles on top of their frozen yogurt, and that's all they want to do. So they'll work their butts off. They'll watch 6 hours of videos, or they'll do, a service project or whatever for sprinkles on ice cream. And just let that soak in. So 25% of your dollar goes to that. 17% of your dollar goes to messaging for youth. And what that is that we understand the price or the benefit, of getting a message out there. I did one video on Robin Williams' suicide and made it very real and told a very real story about my suicide attempt. That video is in the 100,000 views in all of its different platforms. But the powerful part of that is 3 to 4 youth every single day, come in from that video. I shot that video. It's been close to maybe it's even been over a year since Robin Williams died. I'm not sure on the date, but it's been some time, and that video is still creating buzz. It's still getting youth to realize that there's hope, that there's an alternative. They don't have to feel this way. And so we create messaging for the youth. 12% goes to the team support, and that's my team and myself, and then 5% goes to the overhead. So that's kind of how it breaks out, and the overhead is our office, which right now it started in a garage, which is fun. It's going to be a fun story. I have some really cool pictures. We had the resources to go and get like a nice office and everything, but I'm a firm believer in 2 filing cabinets and a door from Home Depot is how you should start a business. And if anyone understands that analogy, then you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, it just means start simple. You don't need to be flashy. And now we're in my basement in my home in Lake Arrowhead, which is really cool. I have an awesome basement, and we have an awesome office now. And eventually, we'll move into a space that will facilitate as we're growing. But the overhead's not huge, but there are things, internet costs. We've got servers, we've got different things like that. So anyway, I hope that answers the question effectively.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So Wes, how can people support a human project and support what you're doing, really help you guys make the impact on, youth that you're making? What can we do to help?
There's a lot of different things. I've never been one to ask for money. I've never asked for money a day in my life. I've always gone out and gotten it. I've built very successful businesses by just doing it. Never gotten traditional investing, anything. So this concept of like donations is very uncomfortable for me. And it's always been. And we have three major ways that you can play in donation now, and they all aren't your traditional just give us money and whatever. The first is our t-shirt program. We kind of took that, and there's a lot of different charities that use t-shirts, but we thought let's do this a little more big picture, have some fun with it. And we have a t-shirt club, kind of like a book club, I guess you could say, where we design a t-shirt once a month. They're limited only to how many subscribers we have. And we design these shirts. They're high quality things you'd find at Nordstrom. It's not like your traditional like marathon running t-shirt, that you get at a rally, which there's nothing wrong with. But these are quality t-shirts with messages that are very powerful, that allow you to have a conversation. And there's been so many stories shared by our t-shirt wearers where they'll be at a coffee shop with a friend and be talking about, then the friend will ask them, what's your t-shirt about? And then they start a conversation, and then that friend either will tell them about their own, depression story, or that their child is dealing with it. And then that gives you, as a normal, quote unquote, human being, and I use that with air quotes, to start sharing a message with people about a human project and empowering somebody else to help empower a child. And it's worked. We've found that parents have had conversations at cocktail parties or whatever, neighborhood parties. I guess cocktail's the wrong thing. You wouldn't wear a t-shirt to, but you get my point. And then that opens up conversation where they are then able to get their kids enrolled into our program. So the t-shirt program is $30 a month. And what we did is we took it to the next level. Is we've been talking to celebrities, and celebrities are coming on board, like Prince E. I guess I can't say the others because we've got some confidentiality, but there's some really cool celebrities that are coming on board to curate our t-shirt, which means they're going to do something unique or special to their audience, but also to anybody who's a subscriber. They get these benefits. And it's just kind of a fun way of making a t-shirt more than just a piece of fabric. So that's $30 a month. 84% of that $34 goes directly into our efforts. We've made some incredible deals with t-shirt vendors. We've kept our costs very in line. So it basically, 84% of that goes there. So that's number one way. We also have the traditional donation, but that's the fun way. Now you get to be a part of something. It's part of a club. We've got a lot of fun social media things we'll be doing with that in the future. So the second way is for especially entrepreneurs who have a network. It's not really about your money. It's about your network. It's about who and how you can help us grow. We have a very exclusive group called The Circle, there's only 50 seats. We started this last October. We're almost filled up, but it's only 50 seats. And these are people like Gary Vaynerchuk, high-level individuals, Chris Ducker, people that have a decent network. Obviously, their net worth is substantial, but their network is really what is powerful. And they've come on board to commit to help us with the human project and grow that. And so there's that for maybe some people who want to play at a little higher game. And that's not just about donating money. That's, think of it like as the Knights of the Round Table. That's just 50 knights and knightesses as well. So, and then the third way, which is really fun, and this goes for educational entrepreneurs, people who are looking to take their game to the next level, is we're putting on an entrepreneurial conference that's never been done before on the style. We've the individual who's putting this together, which is one of our circle members, has rented out 52,000 square feet at Mandolin Bay in Las Vegas, Nevada. And we are bringing together the most amazing lineup of entrepreneurs that I can think of, especially for a first-time event, and especially for something of this caliber, to come in and educate entrepreneurs on how to build businesses, and not just entrepreneurs, but anybody in that concept, and how to build businesses that matter, build businesses that will dominate and build businesses that become bigger than you. And we've got guys who have taken companies from 10 million to 3.5 billion who are going to teach you how to build $1 billion business. We have Dan Martell, we have Gary Vaynerchuk, we have Adam Braun, Tucker Max, David Bradford, Dr. Bill Dorfman. Even John Lee Dumas for the podcasters, who's makes $2+ million in pajama bottoms from his couch. So there's just a lot of people coming together. 100% of the ticket proceeds go to a human project. So you buy that ticket, you get educated, you learn all these amazing things, you spend 3 days with these amazing people and other amazing entrepreneurs, and your ticket proceeds are going to a human project, which is huge. That's going to be, if all the numbers come out, it's going to be a 7-figure donation that collectively a bunch of entrepreneurs got to make. So I think for your audience, those are the 3 fundamental ways that they can monetarily help. And then we have an entire volunteer program. If you're interested in setting up what we call a human pod, you can go to our website, click on the volunteer button. It'll tell you all the information there. We're very, very, very picky. I'm going to be very blunt with you on that. We don't allow everyone to volunteer. That takes a special circumstances. It takes a lot of different aspects for you to be a volunteer, not just the legal side of if you can play with children, but is this right for you? And so we have a whole process of finding that out. But we encourage individuals to volunteer and to, not be scared to volunteer, but just also realize that we want to make it a win-win for both parties. So anyway, that's kind of the basics.
Very cool. So we have www.ahumanproject.com where you can go to donate and participate in the actual nonprofit organization. And then Wes, what is the URL for the entrepreneurial event? Because that sounds amazing. And we've got a ton of entrepreneurs that are going to be listening to this who would most likely want to go to that. And it would definitely be a good idea if they went to that.
It definitely will be. It's going to be amazing. And it's a lot about networking. We've got the speakers, but like I said, 52,000 square feet. And I believe that 32,000 is dedicated just to network, like a huge networking lounge with networking stuff. But it's thrivelasvegas.com. So thrivelasvegas.com.
And when is the date for that?
It is October 16th through the 18th.
Very good. So one of the things that we promised to discuss here today was actually getting into the business side, of growing a human project and how you created the mission and what you're doing to raise revenue and make an impact. But it looks like we're going to run out of time here today. Would you be willing to come on and do a follow-up show for the Self-Made Man crew on and share some of your business wisdom?
I would. In fact, I'm already scheduled for a week from now, this time again. So we're good. Oh,
fantastic. So you did that while we were sitting here talking.
Yeah.
Awesome. Very good. Well, I appreciate it so much, Wes. And, thank you for everything that you're doing. It's an absolutely unbelievable story. And I'm so grateful that you made a decision way back when you were 7 or 8 years, old, to use the pain that you were going through to help others and to make a difference. And that's such an amazing It's had such an amazing ripple and impact and will continue to do so. So thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing your passion with everybody else. And for those of you who are listening to this, I would like to ask you for 2 favors. One is go over to humanproject.com, and if this has inspired you, if you feel inspired to make a donation, please do that. I know I'm going to be. And 2, please share this episode with those that you know, because whether it's someone in your life or your friend's life, a family member's life, there is someone who is going to have a child or maybe who went through abuse when they were younger or who knows someone who's going through abuse now that will really benefit from a human project and what Wes and his team have put together here. So give them an opportunity to discover it. That would be the favor that I ask of you. So Wes, once again, thank you so much for everything that you've done. Thanks for coming on the show and for putting on the event in October for entrepreneurs so they can live out their mission and make their impact. And I really appreciate the time today.
I appreciate it as well, and everything that you're doing. And I echo that. You never know. And I spent way too long being way too quiet about my story, but you never know what type of an impact a simple act like sharing a podcast can do. I can tell you it does amazing things, and podcasting is an amazing tool to get a message out there. And we have had interviews like this change people's lives, not because of me, but because of them being able to wake up and empower themselves and live a life that they've always been always been destined to live. So I echo what you said about sharing this episode.
Very good. Well, Wes Chapman, thank you so much. And thank you guys for listening. And we'll see you next week. Take care.